Welcome. I'm back. Now until up. Episode 8. It's your boy Vic Purcell. If you listen to my audio on Spotify, it's Vic the Genius. But I'm glad to be back, man. It's episode 8 of Now Until Up, and it's been a little while, but I think I got some value to bring to you today. So, for those who know about this show, we talk about hybrid athletes, hybrid competitions, and just kind of anything that is in this lifestyle. So, I compete in high rocks, DECA, and a slew of other events, some local events. But I'm basically moonlighting, right? So, I train a lot, but I also work a 9 to 5 job. And so I'm kind of like in this, I'm not an elite athlete where that's all that I do. I'm not going to the Olympics, but this show isn't necessarily for those people. This show is for everybody else. This is going to be a good episode. And basically, this episode, I'll be talking about a few things. The first thing is physiology of hybrid athletes with larger muscles. So I'm going to recap a podcast that I listened to by Dr. Phil Price, who's the host of the Progress Theory podcast. He had a guest, Evan Peikon. He's a physiologist and a biomedical data scientist. So I'm basically going to talk about some of the things that I got from that. It kind of was a mind blowing podcast, to be honest. I don't know how I found it, but this podcast was recorded in 2022, and it's basically the first uh, in-depth analysis that I've heard for people who kind of fit into the demographic that I'd say that I'd fit into. So you're a larger muscle athlete, but you're doing endurance sports. So I'm going to get into that, but also I'm going to talk about representation. So I'm not going to attempt to solve that on this podcast, but I'm just going to talk about some things that somebody reached out with some questions they wanted me to talk about in the show a couple times. So basically, just going to respond to that and just give my opinion and maybe just offer some additional questions, based on that question, right? Because that's like a long term ongoing discussion about representation in sports and just in different spaces, right? Let's also talk about another thing. So, training plans that extend beyond 7 days. So, if anybody is listening to this, I am not about to go in depth on that. So, there's basically a couple of other podcasts that have touched on this in the last month. So, I think it's just relevant for me to offer, what I took from what they talked about in those two podcasts. One is Rich Ryan's podcast, Reinforce Running, and the other one is The Running Public. So basically, it's a pretty good discussion, like 7 days versus having a 10 day versus a 2 week, schedule, right, for your training. And that's basically the main points. I'm going to talk about a few other things, but let's jump into it. So this is cool, man. Live is you got to have some thoughts in your mind to go live solo. It's not as easy as some people may think it is to do a live, uh, especially if you don't do this every day, which I don't. But I'm going to do my best, so bear with me. So, physiology of hybrid athletes with larger muscles. So, I'm going to do my best to give you like the layman's term. I'm not a scientist. I just I've nerded out on some of this stuff, and I took a few notes from this podcast episode on the progress theory. So, the host is a researcher from St. Mary's University and a lecturer for science and biomechanics. But his guest, Evan Peikon, which he's a physiologist, biomedical data scientist, and co-founder of Knox. So he basically is currently training elite level CrossFit athletes, but his background is in endurance sports. So, but he transitioned into the CrossFit space some years back. Um, I don't think that this topic has been talked about enough. Uh, Hybrid sports is kind of new in terms of CrossFit is hybrid, but I wouldn't consider it hybrid in the sense of like a high rocks, right? High rocks is a true endurance sport. It's long form, and it's like continuous for like an hour, right, or more for some people. Um, this podcast they talked about the role of the cardiovascular system, the effects of the of muscle size on endurance performance, and I'm just going to give you some takeaways here. So basically, mitochondria for somebody like myself with larger muscles, just naturally, my mitochondria are maybe more developed than somebody who's traditionally more suited for an endurance sport, like a smaller like a cyclist or or a Kipchoge type person, where their cardiac output and their cardiovascular control is they're advanced on that side, right? So basically, that's just a reality that you can't do anything about. Like you're born with certain things and you have what you have now. You can work through that, but you may not ever be a Kipchoge, if you are 210 pounds like I am right now, right? But that's okay. So there's another part that's genetic, and that's blood volume. So he talked about uh, your body has a certain amount of blood. You can't train additional blood volume. So whatever you have is what you have. And it's essentially like a ceiling, right? And you can do exactly what someone else is doing, but they just may have a particular ratio to where they're able to pump blood based on a certain activity at a certain rate where you're not going to pump blood at the same rate. But if you so if we talk about like maintaining effort for 30 minutes, you may be able to maintain effort for 30 minutes at a certain rate. But now, if you compare what you can do in 10 seconds to that person, maybe you can do 10 seconds worth of work at an increased rate over that person who can do 30 minutes worth of work. And I think that's nothing new, right? Uh, but let's get into the next thing here. So he gave an example about a top level CrossFitter, uh, where basically over 5 years, her VO2 max decreased when she started training for CrossFit, but her performance increased, and she was a games podium winner. And what happened is her specificity and her efficiency at CrossFit increase, but she didn't need to increase her VO2 max to be good at CrossFit. She already had a high VO2 max genetically, and so it didn't. So all this focus, we hear a lot of people talk about doing work to increase your VO2 max. Maybe you don't have to increase your VO2 max, because another thing they touched on is your body is like basically it's like a water pump, right? So say your heart is a water pump. So you're looking at a house. You have a house, you have your water pump in the basement, and your heart would be the water pump. The pipes in your house would be your arteries, and your muscles are like a faucet, right? You turn the faucet on, and that's the pressure of the water comes out of the faucet. That's like your muscles performing. Essentially, you could increase the diameter of the pipes in the house, or you could increase, say your arteries got bigger so you could pump more blood, right? Your faucet, the water won't flow out the faucet if you increase the artery size, or you increase the pipes in the house, because now the pressure, it can only pump but so much. So that that I don't want to get too deep into this. I'm not a scientist, right? So I'm trying to do this in layman's terms. So essentially, you have larger muscles, and you can't pump but so much blood as a human being, regardless of how high your VO2 max is, regardless of how fit you think you are. The larger your muscles are, it takes more blood to fill those muscles, where a smaller person does not have the same amount of muscles. So the it doesn't take them as much to fill their body with their muscles with blood if they're performing a particular activity. So if you just happen to be a 200 plus pound person, there's going to be some limitations on how much blood you can pump throughout your body. Um, so what so let me get into some solutions. That's kind of like the science from a non-scientist. So hopefully this didn't confuse you. So basically what I got out of this was your you have a ceiling and you have a floor, and you are essentially, let me find this. I took some notes here. So what you want to do is, instead of increasing your ceiling, right, your VO2 max, doing all this hard long work, you want to you want to raise your floor, meaning your base aerobic conditioning is really, that's really the priority. Like your muscles and how much effort you can put out at the highest rate is not going to increase over an endurance sport like a high rocks, which is a long 60-minute to 90-minute race for some people. Your aerobic base, if you're a stronger athlete, has to increase. Now, how do you do that? There's plenty of people out here talking about this, plenty of podcasts and trainers, but they're not saying what this is the key that I got from this here. They're not saying what this guy was saying. And I think it'd be, I'm just giving you a recap. You can go listen to it, the full podcast, and he'll break it down in a better way. But I just want to put you on to some information, right? But what you got to look at is your your ability to do recovery work or put miles on your feet. Um, these recovery runs. What this person basically said is that if you have larger muscles, there's kind of not really such thing as a recovery run. That's going to sound like a lot of people are not going to agree with that statement, but miles on your feet, it may be more appropriate. And he gave an example. Say you were riding a bike and you wanted to do a 30-minute bike ride. Instead of riding your bike for 30 minutes, you do maybe 30, 60-second intervals at a zone 2 heart rate. And every 60 seconds, you would rest for 10 seconds, for 5 to 10 seconds, because your heart rate is not really the determining factor of your recovery if you have larger muscles. What he said was your muscles are contracting at a level that a smaller person, their muscles aren't contracting when they're doing minimal work. So your heart isn't pumping like that. You could be 120 beats a minute, but the fact that you're just out there running, it does not take as much for your muscles to contract in a certain way if you have larger muscles. So basically, you need to refresh your muscles if you're doing like zone 2 work. That doesn't mean you don't do the quality work that you need to do, but what this person said is you are not recovering if you're doing recovery workouts. It's not really a recovery workout. So I hope that that's what you get from me trying to explain this stuff. That is really the biggest piece that I got from it. You could do marathon training, you can do triathlon training, and it doesn't mean you don't need to put volume in, but maybe you're going too hard on your work, right? This is what he said. Basically, 97% of the athletes that he's dealt with all work too hard on their easy days, um, and I'm sure you would fall into that 97% just like I would. So again, not to say that you got to do the exact 60-second, 30 intervals of 60 seconds on a recovery run with a 10-second rest. But again, remember, it's a recovery run. Like, why are you so pressed to feel like, well, I got to keep running for 30 minutes straight and I can't stop? Your muscles are working too hard if you're 200 pounds running for 30 minutes thinking you're going to recover. So, another thing is running economy at different paces. So say you were doing that interval work, but recovery interval work, right? You ever run slow and it feels like very difficult to run slow? But that's everybody, right? But it's more difficult when you have larger muscles to run slow, where it's easier for you to run it. It feels more natural to run at a certain pace. If you were doing this like a pace that was comfortable, but you were walking, every couple of minutes for like 10 seconds to let your muscles refresh, maybe your heart rate wouldn't really go up because you keep taking breaks, but you're able to keep moving and then build your aerobic base at a pace that is not necessarily like stressful to you, stressful in the mind, stressful in the body. It's like it's that versus a 10-minute pace versus like a 8:30 pace for somebody that's on a recovery run. Maybe 8:30 pace for 30 minutes would raise their heart rate up to here in a way that the 10-minute pace would not. But if you keep resting, maybe your heart rate won't go up like that. So what I'm going to do is what I did yesterday. Yesterday I did a base building workout, um, and it was 12 minutes of running, 12 minutes of ski erg, 12 minutes of rowing, 12 minutes on an assault bike. And instead of finishing with the 12 minutes of running, I did 12 minutes of running plus an 8-minute hike on the treadmill with 10 minutes of run walking, where every 60 seconds I would walk for like 10 seconds. And basically, you got to let your ego go and realize that, like, you can put the work in, but put the work in effectively, and don't think that you're going to do exactly what another athlete is going to do if y'all have completely different physiology. So I think I went into that enough. Last thing, he said, if you could run a 5-minute mile, like the people that can run a 5-minute mile and deadlift 500 pounds or squat 500 pounds, he said you still may not have, you might not be fit enough to do a 30-minute recovery run. He said that time domain for 5 minutes, it's great. But when it comes to like science and physiology and biomechanics, like that 5-minute mile person is not fit enough in terms of their base sometimes if they're like that strong. So increasing your floor would mean doing what I'm saying that he said. I'm just reiterating what this person said. And doing that recovery run or that recovery run walk or that recovery cycle, stop pedaling for 10 seconds, cycling, stop pedaling for 10 seconds. Doing something like that will help you out. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good recap. They went in depth. It's like an hour long episode, so I did my best to try to talk about some science stuff without really talking about it. But I think check out the Progress Theory, hosted by Dr. Phil Price, and look for the episode with Evan Peikon, Peikon. Um, all right, so the next thing I want to get into is training plans that extend beyond the traditional 7 days. So I listened to a couple podcasts talk about this, and the premise of it is a 7 day work week, 7 day week that we're all our lives are based around is kind of where we schedule everything. You got your rest days, you got your primary like workouts that you do, you got your recovery days or recovery workouts. It's just all balanced within 7 days. But what if you extended that out into 9 days, right? Or 10 days or 2 weeks? So I listened to the running public talk about this. I listened to Reinforce Rich talk about this. And my take on it is whatever you're going to do, you should look at what's prescribed for you in your training plan as like the primary thing that you need to work on during that block. And say, for instance, Um, you want to do hill runs, you want to do track workouts, you want to do a long run, and you want to lift weights, and and you want to lift 3 days a week, right? That might be a lot of work on your body if you try to cram it into like a 6 day plus one rest day window if you want to do all of that, depending on like who you are, right? What I do is it's not a 7 day, it's kind of like I'm just flexible in terms of I know what days I need to work on, and I know what days if I need to rest. Where some days I have a 2 a day workout, and some days I have I'll have an extra rest day, depending on like if I had a 2 a day followed by something else the next day, I might add in a rest day there. But the key is to not skip your rest, right? You can't extend this out so you for the sake of not resting. And you don't necessarily need to do as much quality work as you may think, depending on who you are and depending on your age, right? Doing a hill workout, like when I say a hill workout, I mean like a long hill workout, and a track workout, and like a hybrid session or two hybrid sessions in 1 week. You're gonna burn out eventually. So what I do is I'll have like 1 week, maybe if I'm in a certain block, I might have two hybrid sessions in 1 week. Usually, if I do, I'm not going to have a track workout that week. The next week, I'll have like a hybrid session, one hybrid session, meaning like compromise running type work when I say hybrid session. Um, and I'll have a track workout that week, or the week that I had the two hybrid sessions, I might do a hill workout because my body can handle hills better than it can handle track work. um like my heart rate still goes up when I do hill workouts, but like I recover, like I'm fine for the next day. I can do a heavy lift session in the morning and a hill workout in the evening, and like I'm okay the next day. If I was to do that instead of a hill work, if I was to do a heavy session in the morning and a track workout, or in the evening or vice versa, I'd be like, I do it sometimes, but it's just not the best for me. So when it comes to 7 days, for me, I still do 7 days, but it's kind of more like 2 weeks. I need to make sure I at least get one of these in, one of these particular types of workouts in a 2 week period. Um, and what the way my training works is I'm on I have I use like the Hayos app training plan, and whoever's out there, like there's plenty of athletes with like training plans that are out there for hybrid specific sports. I don't necessarily follow it like the same exact thing that they say on the app, because I realize like, yeah, there may be a certain type of strength sessions, but I might need to do more aerobic work than strength for my particular goals in the base building block. But I'm still doing the strength sessions, but I may adjust certain things because I've been training enough to kind of be intuitive about that. But I'll do that, and then I also do like classes, like hybrid classes, where it's kind of stuck to that schedule. Like if I want to actually do the class, I have to go in. There's only available at these particular times. So I'm aware of that. So I kind of base my 2 weeks out like that, right? So because I still got work, I still got a traditional life schedule like everybody else does, unless you're an Olympic level athlete or all you do is, train and compete at the highest levels and you're getting paid for this. But for the general person, I think 2 weeks with kind of like the 7 day week plan, but just knowing you got to get one of these in and one of these in at some point during the 2 weeks, that works for me. So I'm not going to be on this 8, 9, 10 day thing. It's just that's too much to try to figure out. Like I'm not trying to do math. Like it's math for daytime math for training schedules, right? That just seems like a lot of extra work. So anyway, So training plans that extend beyond 2 days, just look into whatever it is that you're prioritizing in your particular training block. Just figure that out. So, all right, let's get into the next thing. So, representation. This topic is a tricky topic, and I'm going to pull up a message that I got from somebody that watches the show, listens to the podcast, and basically the message was asking about like representation. I mean, like it could be black people, Hispanic people, uh, woman, whatever you want to say in a particular space. This person was talking about like representation for black and brown people at the elite level specifically, and they brought up let's see, an obstacle course racing, hybrid racing. Basically, you don't really see a lot of black and brown people at the elite level in this space. That doesn't mean you don't see any, you just don't see a lot. Um, and he brought up the CrossFit Games this year and how Chandler Smith finished in seventh in the world, and then Christian Harris with this, he was on the team in the CrossFit Games. They were in the top five. So basically, how do we increase participation in the elite events? That's a tricky question, right? Because I don't know if you can increase elite level anything by okay, let me see how I can address this. Because I'm not going to solve this here today, but elite level positions, there's people, for instance, like Eric Williams. This is my Deca Strong partner um, last month. He competed in High Rocks a couple times, like twice maybe, and he ended up coming in first place in our age group and second place overall in New York. Right now, his time wasn't enough to be at the elite level, elite 15 level this season because there's not so many spots. Then you have Anas, who is the names I'm listing right now. These are two black American citizens, right? I think Anas, he's French, but he may be. I know he lives in the U.S. So um, he's also been at that like on the cusp, right? But this is a new sport. And a lot of these guys are not necessarily 25, 28. They may be like in their 30s or 40s, right? But they just have been doing sports for a long time, and they have the capacity to kind of, show up and do well. But it does not mean that there's going to be a spot laid out for them just to, mix up the bag a little bit uh, for the sake of like optics. You got a lot of issues that have nothing to do with sports, like socioeconomic issues, that are the real discussion. And I don't think anybody that runs a company, a racing company, um, is like in a position to do much about that piece of it because one, like High Rocks is based in Germany, right? So in terms of fixing uh, interests for athletes in the United States and a specific demographic of people, that's probably at the bottom of their list of things to do, right? But I will say, whether it's Spartan, whether it's High Rocks, there's a lot of representation in the sport, just not at the elite level. So I'm of the mind that like you just got to show up and compete. I mean, you could say representation for a lot of different groups. It would be nice, but you have to compete. But when I go to New York and compete, and I see the people in the building, there's a lot of people of color in the building. Um, but I think what's going to happen over time is you will start seeing people if the sport remains. But at the end of the day, like endurance sports, have not necessarily been the focal point. I can say for black people specifically. I'm black, so I'm not going to speak for everybody. I can't speak for all black people, but I know as an athlete, I played basketball in high school. Um, a lot of black people, they play basketball, they play football. They're looking for money because the conditions for black people in general are not that great. So when you in America, socioeconomically, right? When you talk about fringe sports, whether it's Spartan, High Rocks, whatever, where there's not really real payouts yet, um, for athletes, it's going to be kind of hard to convince somebody that thinks that they might be at the place where they could maybe. When I say somebody, I mean like a younger person, because all this it has to be about a younger group of people. Like you can't start recruiting 45-year-olds thinking that they're going to be at the elite. They might make it, but it's kind of like too late, right? But a younger person, it's like they got to choose. You can't do everything. The sports, endurance sports have been around. Track and field have been around. You got 800-meter uh, people who will probably do great if they had some muscle mass on them. If they were to do high rocks or a deca fit or something like that. But my whole point in saying this is that the issue is bigger than the sport, and you're not going to tackle it by being disappointed by not seeing diversity at the elite 15. That's 15 people, right? It's just it is what it is. Now, what I think you can do is, one of the things of many is that you can just share the information. You can reach out to somebody. You can go talk to kids. There's some groups here in DC, like Grit USA. They have a youth program for triathletes where they have like sponsorships for youth high school students to learn about being a triathlete, and they compete, right? So at the end of the day, that is really like it's about individual things that you can do because it's going to be a lot of energy for you to press a private company to prioritize this topic, especially somebody that's not based in the United States, a German company. So I could go on about this, but I think the real thing is like, what are you doing? What am I doing? If we think that this is an issue, maybe you don't think it's an issue. I think it's less of an issue, to be honest. It's more of a desire. But when I go to High Rocks, and not to say every venue that I've been to has been that diverse, but at least New York, it is definitely a lot of people are represented in New York at at the highest levels. Like I said, Eric Williams won uh, the age group and came in second for the day, right? And he was in a separate. I don't think he was in the same heat as the guy that came in first place. So he might have won that day. Now, obviously, there's time issues with the venue because you have like 4 laps, running laps with all these turns. So like the time just wasn't globally. It wasn't on an elite 15 time, but it might have been if it was done in like Spain or something like that, right? So, but I think the discussion people can't shy away from the discussion, right? So I wanted to first bring it up solo. I'm going to do the same topic, but probably have a guest or two on here and kind of just like brainstorm about it. But uh, I think we just need to look beyond the sport. It's bigger than the sport. Representation is bigger than a particular race. When I say race, I mean like High Rocks the race, Deca Fit the race. It's bigger than that. So look beyond that. Look at what can you do yourself or help somebody else do something that they're already doing. So that's my take on it. The last thing I want to talk about: staying the course and quieting the noise. So what do I mean by this? Hybrid athletes of different backgrounds, different abilities. Listen, my season ended January. I mean July, June 10th in New York. That was the end for that was the first race of the season, but it was really the end of my season. I got injured um, late. 2022, and that kind of carried over into the spring of it carried over into the spring of 2023. And basically I couldn't run for a while. And I stayed active as much as I could, but I just lost a lot. And it's not like I've been running at this level for a long time. I was a much better runner, you know, 15 years ago, right? So, um, but I bring up to say that, like, I knew this summer the course for me was base building, right? There's still so many things going on. I competed in the Decker Strong teams, to support the gym that I go to. We did well. We made it into the top 20 globally, but I think we got bumped out recently. So we're going to do another one in September. But my point is, I could do a lot more events, but I know, like, it's a limit on my body. It's a limit on if I'm prioritizing a particular competition. Um, you just got to stay your own course. You can't do what everybody else is doing. You can't follow the same training plan that everybody else is following, because you may regress if you try to do what somebody else is doing. So instead of regressing, why don't you stay on the course that you said you was going to stay on, quiet out the noise, and don't base what it is that you need to do on what you see everybody else on the internet doing or everybody else at your gym doing. And you go when you need to go. Like, I took a little break from hybrid specific uh training, because I know, like, I need to do that, but I don't need to do it right now. I'm not competing right now. And there's a lot of people who talk about this online, about when I say online, I mean different podcasts, different IG pages with some of the coaches in this space. And I mean, they kind of consistently say the same thing. Like, you might need to take a break from some of this type of work. It's very taxing on your body. So balance your life out. Don't feel the pressure of, like, always having to be on for a particular thing. If you know you're doing the work that I'm doing is not necessarily that flashy and shiny right now, right? It's not a lot of speed. It's just the work that I know I need to do. And eventually I'll be where I need to be, and I'll be ready to race. My plan is to race in December, and maybe something else will happen a little bit before that. We'll see. But the point is, I'm not going to pressure myself to the point of being injured, because that's kind of what I did last year. Is I had this 100-mile bike ride with almost 7,000 feet of elevation, and before that I had a high rocks, and then right after that, like a couple weeks later, I had a high rocks, and basically tried to jump back into training after the high rocks. With all of that volume, it got to me. It got to my hip, and I've been dealing with it ever since. So stick to the script, stick to your script. Don't stick to someone else's script, because you will end up being booted out of the movie. And I want you to stay in the movie, in your own movie, and just stay the course, man. I'm just here to see everybody do well. Hopefully, you want to see me do well, and that's that. So that is all that I have, and hopefully, you enjoyed this live. It's not that easy to do a live by yourself, so try it out. You might surprise yourself. Signing out now until up, Vic Purcell, Vic the Genius on Spotify for music, and peace.